Greetings and welcome to Jesse I Interviews, recorded and produced on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in what is now known as Melbourne, Australia. This episode is an interesting one, especially for Australians, as it features an interview with an Australian man, Dennis Sindrey, who was not only present in Jamaica for the birth of ska music, but actively involved in it. It's a fascinating story, which I probably wouldn't have even known about if it wasn't for the work of Melbourne DJ and fellow PBS FM announcer Mohair Slim, aka Lloyd Dewar. In 2008, he helped organise a reunion of the Caribs, a group of Australian musicians who ended up in Jamaica in the late 50s, playing on the hotel circuit and working as a studio band for some of the earliest local Jamaican recordings. I'll let Dennis himself tell the story properly though. If you're new to the podcast, please understand that I'm presenting all interviews here completely unedited. The idea being to capture the moment, even down to including the more casual talking before and after the official part of each interview. If I recall correctly, this interview wasn't actually intended for broadcast at all, and it wasn't recorded professionally. I think I was interviewing him for a newspaper article, and I was simply recording the conversation on a speakerphone. I think it's definitely worth the listen though. It's a unique piece of Jamaican and Australian music history. So here we go. Jesse I interviews Dennis Sindrey in June 2008. Okay, can you still hear me?
Yep, sure.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks very much for taking the time, Dennis. Like I said, I know you must be tired after the flight, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, you always get a second win when you know.
I know. So it's a really amazing story. The Caribs, a bunch of Aussie blokes making music in Jamaica. I guess the best place to start is the beginning. Like, how did this happen? How did you guys all end up in Jamaica?
Well, what happened was there's a guy named Max Wildman who lived in Melbourne, and he had managed bands before, and he'd actually taken a band on tour of the Far East circuit, like Ceylon, India, and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And he decided to set up a band in Surfers Paradise. He took over a nightclub in Surfers Paradise called the Corroboree.
Okay.
So he came down to Melbourne and he was looking for a band. At that time, I was very friendly with Peter Stoddard. In fact, we shared a house together. Peter Stoddard was a piano player from Adelaide.
Right.
And Lowell Morris, of course, I've known over the years for many, many years from Dixieland days, And so he came down and he booked Peter to play piano, and he couldn't find a bass player. So Peter said, Dennis plays bass, which I didn't at the time. Right? So what I did was I worked at the Hotel Cecil in those days, a little trio up there. So I'd go in every night early and practice on the bass for about a month before I moved to Surfers Paradise.
Right.
But I told him, I said, I'm really a guitar player, but I play a little bit of bass,
Yep.
So we went up there and we started the band, and that band was called the Caribs.
Right.
And the star of that band was a Haitian conga drummer named Albert Laguerre, who had come to Australia with the Cats from Dunham dance troupe,
Okay.
and married an Australian girl and stayed. So that was the Caribs we had there. And while we were there, Max Wildman, the leader, had been through on a tour through the Caribbean and had made contacts, and they had a club in Jamaica called the Glass Bucket Club, which had been a very famous club, but was on Honest Last Legs.
Right.
So they wanted to try and revive it, and so they called Max and offered him the job as the manager of the club. And he said, well, I'll come, but only if I can bring 3 of my musicians with me. So they hummed and hawed for a little while, and finally they said okay, and that's how we got to go to Jamaica, right?
Right.
Actually, when we landed in Jamaica, we didn't even know what we were getting paid or anything. It was a bit of a gamble, but it worked out okay.
Yeah. So the guy from the Caribbean actually stayed, and the guys from Australia went to the Caribbean.
Well, no, Albert didn't stay. We went to the Caribbean, right? And
Yep.
Albert wouldn't travel. He didn't want to go back to Haiti or the Caribbean.
Right.
He liked it in Australia too much.
Okay.
So sorry, maybe I misunderstood you. Sorry.
Oh no, sorry. It's a speakerphone. It must be a little hard. It's okay. I heard you. It's fine.
Okay.
So what were your first impressions of Jamaica and the music scene then?
Well, when we first got there, we were naturally a little bit nervous because the band Caribs that we formed in Surfers Paradise, we specialized in a sort of a modern Latin type of music.
Right.
there was no ska in those days, of course, right? But like George Shearing used to have a quintet that used to play this Latin music, and we sort of modeled ourselves between George Shearing and Cal Jada's quintet. That was the type of music we played, but we felt that when we're going to Jamaica, that we're going to the heart of the Caribbean to play Latin music, and we were kind of a little bit nervous because we didn't know how good the guys would be when we got there.
Right.
But when we got there, actually, in the drum area, Lowell Morris was far and away superior to any drummer they had on the island at the time.
Right.
Peter was equal to the best they had in piano players, and I was not up to the best they had in Jamaica because they had a guy named Ernie Ranglin who blew me away, right?
Yeah.
But where I got my sort of impetus from, they started using me in the studio as a studio musician.
Yep.
And so that's just at about the time. Well, it started off with what they call the blue beat, which then became the ska.
Yep.
And the big thing with that was I worked with the group of musicians that later became the Scatolites. And the thing was, I had a steady job at the hotel with the Caribs, so I couldn't play with the Scatolites on the job. I played in the recording studio with them. Yeah?
Right.
So they went on then to become world famous, so I missed out on that one.
Well, I mean, this is an era that's really regarded by many people as a real golden era for Jamaican music. I mean, you were literally there at the birth of these new styles, ska and blue beat.
Yeah, that's true. It was a beginning. In fact, I don't think anybody really knows who started the ska beat, but I know I was one of the first. And the first time I ever played it, I was doing a session. We used to do sessions all the time, and this was for Clement Dodd, Coxon, right?
Yep.
Coxon Studios, right? And he and Johnny Moore, who was with the Scatolites, they came over and they were doing this number. They say, "Can you play the beat so it's got a edgy feel?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what you mean." They said, "Well, on the offbeat." So I played on the offbeat, and I said, "No, that's not it." And then I put a lot of treble on it, and I played, instead of playing the downbeat with the plectrum, I played up.
Right.
And then this was ska, ska, ska. And I said, "Yeah, that's it. That's the sound we want. That's ska, right?" And that was the first time I had heard the word, and that was the first time I played it. But that was right at the time it was all coming together.
Right. Well, can you tell me a little about those the studio sessions? I believe it was Federal Studios that you first started. Is that right?
Yeah, Federal Studios was the place. That's where it all happened, right? And what happened was in the beginning, I had a contract to work exclusively for Federal Records as a studio musician, and not to work for any of the competing sound system guys, because they gave me a guarantee of a minimum. But of course, I never lived up to the minimum. So after 3 months, I said, "Well, forget that. I just record wherever I want,
Yeah.
But so it all happened in Ken Curry's studio, and at the time, Graham Goodall was the engineer there.
Yep.
And as I say, basically the studio musicians, most of the backing musicians were what became the Scatolites. And then the piano players changed a little bit from time to time. In the very beginning, where before the Federal Recording Studio was Chris Blackwell.
Right.
And that's when the Caribs did most of the work as a group, the Caribs. But how that worked, we used to work at the hotel, not the hotel, but the nightclub, and then later on the hotel, till about 2 o'clock in the morning, or 1 if there was not many people.
Yep.
And then we'd move over to the RJR Radio Jamaica recording studio. Well, it was their normal on-air studio, but closed down at that time of the night.
Yep.
And it was just a single-track machine, the first ones we started doing, and then they graduated to a 2-track. But that's where we did all the stuff for Island Records, was done there.
Right.
Federal Studios came a little bit later, after Chris had moved on to England,
Yep. So did you get much? I mean, back in those days, I guess that was the early days of sound system as well. Guys like Coxon and Duke Reid playing their sounds. Were you in a position where you were recording music in the studio and then you would be able to go and hear it played out at sound systems, or were you too busy playing in the band?
No, I could, but the thing was, I was working 6 nights a week in the hotel, right?
Right.
So I didn't have the chance to get to the sound system, but I had attended a few, when I had a chance.
Yep.
And the music we made, the way Coxon and most of the Duke Reid and all those guys in the beginning, what they did, they would make the records in the studio, pick out the ones they thought were going to be good, they'd release them on a blank label.
Yep.
And then they'd sell them for like, I think it was 10 shillings a piece, which was a lot of money for a record in those days,
Right.
45. And they'd make back their money, their recording costs and the musicians' costs off the blank label.
Right.
Then if it was successful, then they'd release it as a single that sold for, I think they sold for about 7 shillings a copy then, you know.
Right, okay.
And that's when, but then Chris Blackwell, of course, was the guy who had the vision to see that there were more Jamaicans in London that had money to buy records than were in Jamaica.
Right.
Because the Jamaicans didn't have that much money as recreational money.
Yep.
So he decided to set up the Island Records in London, and he took Millie Small with him, and Graham Goodall was in partnership with him too then, right?
Right.
And then, of course, they made My Boy Lollipop, and that was the start of the great, West Indian music explosion, I guess, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, did you have any idea at the time that Jamaican music would come to be so revered around the world, and there would be collectors and obsessives and everything decades later?
I had no idea, because I tell you, when I first went to Jamaica, I got all wrapped up in calypso. Calypso was my favorite thing.
Right.
And the ska we used to play at the hotel, because that was the music they wanted to dance to, you know. And then when reggae came in, but we were much more known for ska than we were for reggae, you know.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
but yeah, it was just a right time to be there, right time and place.
Yeah. Well, these days, I mean, I've been to Jamaica in recent times, and Jamaica's got a pretty scary reputation around the world. As so many murders, such a violent place. But back in those days, it would have been obviously would have been quite different.
Oh, it was. It was very, very different back in those days. I mean, we used to go after 2 o'clock and finishing work at the hotel at 2 o'clock. We'd go out to these little what they call bop clubs, bop bars, right?
Yep.
Where they just served rum and a little bit of the Jamaican bread. And I remember we used to buy a can of sardines for a shilling.
Right.
And they'd chop up peppers, Scotch bonnet peppers, and onions, and mix that in with the sardines and put a bit of vinegar on it. And that was a bob, right?
Right.
And for 10 shillings, we'd drink half a dozen beers or more, right? So for 10 bob, you had everything you needed, you know?
Yeah. Well, so what happened in the years after the Caribs broke up? And, why did it sort of finish up for you guys in Jamaica?
Well, it didn't really finish up, because what happened was we lost the job that we had at the Myrtle Bank Hotel, and we didn't have another job to go to at that time. So it ended up that Lowell Morris went to play in one place, Peter Sutter went to play in another, and I joined Byron Lee's band.
Right.
And then I left after a year with Byron. I went out on my own again with another Caribs, which didn't last more than about 3 or 4 months.
Okay.
And then I joined Kes Chin's band, and Peter played with me for a little bit in Kes Chin's band, but not very long. And then we sort of drifted apart, and then in '62, we came back together again at the Sheraton Hotel. Okay. And that was with Peter and myself, and of course by that time Lowell Morris had come back to Australia.
Right.
So we still had the Caribs led by Peter and myself, and with 4 Jamaican guys. It was a 6-piece band we had.
Okay.
And we didn't, the reason that we didn't hear more about the Caribs recording was because by that time the Scatolites and later on came Lynn Tate and the what do you want to call his band?
The Jets, I think.
Yeah, the Jets, right? Lynn Tate and the Jets, right? He came along and they became the studio musicians, and we didn't do the studio work then because Peter was he had the full-time job doing landscaping as well as working at night at the hotel, and there was me, and I was available. I got tied up making radio commercials. Okay. Which became quite a sideline for me, because I was doing most of the jingles you heard on the air or TV in Jamaica. Okay. I was doing them, and it worked out to be a very good paying sideline. Right. But and then we just drifted apart, and what happened was we were in this very successful in John Canoe Lounge, much more successful than we ever were in the early days. In the John Canoe Lounge, the Caribs became gigantically popular in Jamaica. We were the most popular band in the country at that time. Okay. But then what happened was I decided I wanted to. A few things happened. Jamaica brought in a work permit law, which made it very. The first question on the work permit form says, what steps are you taking to train a Jamaican to replace you in your current position? Right. So when you get that, you say, why are things looking a bit dicey here?
Yeah.
So I started making inquiries about going to the States. And to be honest, another second reason was the life was starting. I now had 2 kids, and it was drinking every night and carrying on, and I just thought, well, I probably need to get out of this lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
So it was going to be one big step, go to America, get out of the music business, which of course never happened, but but that was a basic reason. And as I say, Peter got tied up. He had his own business. He still has a business today as a landscape. He's the foremost landscape gardener in Jamaica.
Okay.
I mean, when I say land, I don't mean a lawnmower guy. I mean a guy doing the big hotels and whatever.
Right.
So that was, and then we sort of went our separate ways then. And Lowell came back to here first. Actually, Max Wildman came back first. Then Lowell followed, and then Peter and I stayed.
Right. And
I stayed until '68. And Pete still lives down there now.
Right. So is this this reunion for the Melbourne Ska Orchestra gig? Is this the first time you've been together, playing together since these days?
Yes, yeah, it is. It's the first time, as I think Lloydie Dewar said, it's the first time in 42 years.
Wow.
It's amazing, eh?
Yeah.
Now, when I say it's the first time we've played together, I mean, I've gone down to when Peter's daughters got married in Jamaica. I've gone down, then we jammed a little bit. But the band has never been together since then. No?
Right. So you must be excited about this, It must be a lot of fun for you guys.
Yeah, looking forward to it,
Yeah. All right, well, I'll just take it off speakerphone so you can hear me properly. Thanks very much, Dennis. It's really fascinating, and I reckon it's just absolutely fantastic that Australia has this history, this connection to Jamaica. You guys should be really proud. Dennis Sindrey speaking to me there from his home in Florida ahead of the Caribs reunion show here in Melbourne back in June 2008. Sadly, Dennis's friend and fellow Caribs member Lowell Morris passed away in May this year at the age of 90. That's it for this one. Thanks as always to the patrons of the podcast, the Don Armageddon Time, the Real General Empress Irie, me Idrin Tom Tanaki, and me Chargy DJ Pablito. If you appreciate what I'm doing here with the podcast and contributing to the oral history of reggae, dancehall and Jamaican music, and you want to help ensure it continues, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Jesse_I_interviews for as little as $3 Australian per month. Thanks for listening. Eyes every time.